You're listening to the Diginauts on the Good Talk Podcast Network.
Hey there, it's the Diginauts. We're very excited that you've chosen to spend an hour stretching your brain with us with the latest science news. Coming up this week, Nikola Tesla started it. The folks at Disney say that they have finished it.
Peter Thiel, does he have a conflict of interest, being an investor in Palantir and part of Donald Trump's administration?
And we will spend some time talking about space. Who's going there soon, and what new discovery has NASA talking? All this and more coming up on the Diginauts. Society,
The future,
morality,
disruption,
policy,
humanity,
innovation,
technology,
morality, the future, law, humanity. It's just going to be me and Eric laughing for about an hour and a half. That's what we have in store for you.
Diginauts.
Hello, greetings, human beings and others. This is the Diginauts. My name is Darren.
And I'm Eric.
And we are here with you for episode 17 of our little show. There's a lot of science news going on lately. Have you noticed?
Yep.
In this anti-science, anti-news universe that we live in at the present climate, there's nonetheless a lot of science news. And we're just contributing to it is really what it comes down to. So many things today. We do this show on a regular basis, and I'm always stoked by the stuff that we have coming out. But today, in particular, I feel like there's some very sciencey science out there for us to talk about. So
Nice.
Hooray. I guess what I'm trying to say to you, the listener, is this is a good one. I'm calling it right now. At the very beginning of the show. But our top of mind subject you have for us, Eric. What do we got?
Yeah, so Mr. Snowden years ago obviously released a wealth of information as to how countries, not only the U.S., but others, leverage intelligence and data and metadata. Now, as a result of that, a company called Palantir kind of emerged from the shadows. And it's definitely a platform that lets them more easily analyze and ingest disparate data, ranging from phone data to internet data. Think of it almost like, a way to drill up, down, sideways, and whichever way they want to get to the data that they want, that they've been capturing, and really make sense of it. So literally they can do things like if they know you're on Skype, they can say, okay, we want this Skype call and we want to see where and who they were talking to for how long, what websites did they go to after their Skype call. They can literally restrict activity to different IP addresses tied to different countries, tied to different people. So it's like the ultimate data exploration tool, specifically made for spy data.
Wow. So the NSA, our friends, who have, depending on who you believe, either been collecting phone calls or collecting metadata, which is really what you're talking about.
Yep.
This information isn't about the calls themselves, but rather everything that goes along with the calls.
I think it can be a little of both. I think metadata is key to it. But I think they can also capture what you're saying too, to some extent.
I'm sure they can, but that becomes a warrant, doesn't it?
Well, I think that's the whole, problem that Snowden exposed, and that these tools and this data collection happen, irrespective of your wishes, right? It's kind of like the spy answering machine. So they're collecting all this data. Palantir is a tool to explore the data and make sense of it. But from my perspective and from what I've read, there's a lot of, I'll call it, trust involved, that people don't violate given laws, right, privacy laws, et cetera.
Right. We have a giant machine gun sitting on a table in the room. Don't worry. It's just sitting there. It's cool. Don't worry about it.
It's cool. Cool.
So now this is your buddy. You've gone off on our show a couple times, Peter Thiel. Is it Thiel? Peter Thiel?
Who cares?
So not near and dear to your heart.
No.
So what's his involvement in this whole process? And well, we're going to be drawing some lines.
Yeah, I mean, he's an investor in Palantir, so clearly there's conflict of interest, in my opinion.
Because he's involved in Donald Trump's government.
Exactly.
So, machine gun on the table, nobody's using it, don't worry. And by the way, Donald Trump is in charge of whether or not it gets used.
Yep.
So, that's cool. This is fine. No big deal. Yeah. So, I mean, he's just an investor? Maybe there's no relation?
Well, I imagine he has his own copy, right? Like, imagine if he wanted to listen in and find out who Andreessen Horowitz is talking to.
Wow. Okay. So what are we really saying about this thing?
So to me, it's a powder keg just waiting to explode again. You know, years ago, Snowden exposed a lot of this, right? And what people are doing and what can be done. But, you know, with Thiel's involvement in the government, with his investment in this company, clearly a conflict of interest, clearly it can be further misused, right? Let's say he has his own home edition, right?
Yeah.
You know, he can conceivably listen in on or, you know, spy into anything that he wants. So, you know, I'm not aware of a governing body that, you know, logs usage, exposes the usage, right? Like who is governing that?
Right. And it wouldn't be, I mean, even if there were a governing body that is in charge of making sure that doesn't happen, they're probably in the process of dismantling it right now.
Exactly. Save the $5. That,
I mean, and we want to get all morally offended about conflict of interest, but it's maybe the, you know, 10th or 11th most disturbing conflict of interest out of many that are surfacing.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, with all of his lawsuits, right? Like taking down not taking down Hulk Hogan, helping Hogan take down Gawker, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, did he leverage Palantir? I don't know.
Interesting. Did he or did he not use the machine gun on the table?
Exactly.
But there's no, like, unlike, I mean, the metaphor stops there, right? Because you can't prove that's, I mean, yeah. Scary and creepy and nothing we can do about it. We talked about a couple episodes ago about how Tech Dirt is in some hot water because of some things they said, like about the supposed or alleged inventor of email. And now the same lawyer that Thiel employed to basically take down Gawker is now coming after Tech Dirt. Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, and we know that this is an administration that doesn't like people who disagree with them and, you know, would I got to be careful, right? Like, here we are talking about the administration. And you can't just, you know, make a full-on claim about things, but we're seeing patterns of fighting the media and all that kind of stuff. And if the same thing, if this is a guy who's willing to go after a major news site like that, or blog, depending on how you want to register it, with everything at his fingertips, he'll throw that power at something. And we also know now that he has this.
Same with Spicer. I forgot which reporter, but I'll have to look it up and follow up. But there was some fiasco where Spicer was alluding to leaking stories about a reporter allegedly to try and prevent the reporter from writing a certain story about the administration.
Right, because free press, except for when they don't want you to. Look, we should end this segment before we just start ranting about the government again. The technology part of it is that, you know, this science exists, and it got essentially inherited by the Trump administration. And one of the investors involved is now in the Trump administration, or adjacent to the Trump administration. So draw your own conclusions and be afraid if you want. For myself, I guess I feel like I need to stop talking about it, lest they log this in a little black book somewhere. Draw a pirate skull next to it. Are you considering a career change? Would you like to perhaps go into the world of computer programming? Well, let me tell you, it doesn't take much to be an expert. Joomla, Drupal, WordPress. These are the words you need to know in order to be employable. And if you go to open source training, you can find training courses available online in those areas. And suddenly your resume is looking shiny. Go to goodtalknetwork.com/ads, click on the OS training banner, and you will be on your way to, who knows, a new career.
Hey, Darren, you really let me down.
What did I do?
You said this was all about science.
Yeah. Okay. So the last segment, we once again started ranting about politics. It was science-based, Anyway. Okay, but we're going to make up for it in this segment. Segment 2 tonight is a Let's Hash It Out. This is where we take hashtags and trending topics that have been big over the last week, and we look at the science behind that news. And science doesn't always trend. Like, it's, your Facebook feed is not normally like, hey, the nerds at the CDC in Atlanta came up with a new germ, right? Like, that's not what shows up. But this week we have not one but two stories that are in the same space, if you will. I did a pun like you like to do.
Brace yourself.
we have two science stories that broke through and trended this week. And they're both pretty big deal. I'm going to start with it's hard to say which of these is bigger or smaller, right? I'll start with
I would say the first one is
smaller.
Bigger.
Is bigger. Me too. So I'm going to say that I'm going to do the second one first. Think about that. SpaceX made an announcement. Elon Musk made an announcement that essentially he was approached by some private citizens who said, we'd like to go into space. And he said, all right, you can go into space. And that was actually literally like he tweeted pretty much that, right? Like, can we go into space?
It will cost you.
Yeah. Nobody knows who the individuals are who are going to make the trip.
That's the interesting thing. Like, who is spending these millions to potentially do it, right? There's no guarantee, if they don't pass like the health tests and whatnot.
Does SpaceX have, I assume that like the sort of Virgin Space and SpaceX and some of these private companies, it's not going to be the same as the astronauts of the world, right? Like, yes, they're going to have a certain degree of rigor that you're going to have to pass because no company wants to be like, oh yeah, we give half of our clientele heart attacks, but but at the same time, it's not. These are essentially passengers. Virgin Galactic is what I was going to say.
I don't think it's going to be a Concorde type flight. Right,
because they're literally going around the moon. So they're going to be in space for what's it take to go around the moon? Pretty weeks at least, right?
I have no idea.
Somehow I want to say a month was the rough what the moon landing took, and I can't remember whether that was on the way there or the way back or whatever. Different rockets then. I think part of the excitement around this story is that he sees this as like they're going to travel faster than humans have ever traveled before. So they made the announcement. They have explained that it's going to be, on their Dragon version 2 spacecraft, which to me, by the time you send me like my entire body out into the frigid vacuum of outer space, I want to be on like version 5 or 6 of the craft. That's just me, right? Like,
so you're not an early adopter?
If you're asking me this question in all sincerity, I like to know everything about what's happening, and then I like to wait for other people to, at least put their feet on the ground. I don't need to be the first guy on the beach at Normandy. I don't mind going there, but somebody else take out the machine guns first is kind of what I'm saying. And to me, this is almost that. I mean, you need sort of the government, brave military dudes to go up and do their thing first, and then you need the like crazy ass pioneers to be like, I'm gonna go do it, and some fraction of them explode, and then. I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not sure I ever have any interest in going into space, personally. I'm not sure what the advantage would be. Like, I think it'd be really cool to see the Earth from far up. But there's a hell of a lot of things that are also really cool that I could spend the money on.
What if it costs like a bus fare?
Well, we'll get there eventually, right? I mean, maybe not a bus fare, but in theory, it would be someday affordable to take these kinds of things. Sure, I don't know, but by then it's got to be super routine. I would think. Like, I want to know that it's as safe as commercial airfare. Yeah, just my take. Would you do it?
If it was as docile as like a plane flight, yes. But if it's like a roller coaster, no. I
mean, there's no way. At least not for now. That's what we're talking about. Again, version 2 of the craft. So, anyway, I mean, yeah, and I mean, when they're still describing it as liftoff, you're not talking about something as gentle as regular airfare. Anyway,
right.
So the other story is the fact that NASA had a telescope reveal the largest batch of Earth-sized planets that they've ever seen. New record for planets located around a single star. This is, the trend in the last decade has been, let's see where life might be, theoretically. So one of the things that they look for is, can we get water? If we can get water, that's going to have to be in what they call the Goldilocks zone of a solar system. Meaning not too hot, not too cold, right? So that's exactly what I mean. That's why, right? So one of the things that would make life as we know it or as we don't know it more possible is liquid water, right? At least Earth analogous life. So not too hot, not too cold means a space in which on that planet liquid water may exist. So part of the search is they're just starting, if you look at the early part of the decade, it's as simple as, are there planets and are they within that so-called habitable zone, from the idea that water may or may not freeze. Now, even within our own solar system, theoretically, like maybe some of Saturn's moons have water, but it's under, the volcano is keeping it warm, or it's under there's an entire frozen lake on top, and then that pressure of all that is enough to make the stuff at the bottom liquid. A lot of it pretty theoretical, but certainly within the realm of possibility, because water has all sorts of cool properties and space is limitless, and we see, geysers and who knows what they are doing and whatnot as we explore our own solar system. But
here's the other thing, right? Like, they're seeing things pretty far away. So it's like, are those things still really there? Or is it just that we're seeing, light that's really old?
Well, we're definitely seeing light that's really old, right? So this particular planet is 40 light years away, which is a ridiculously far distance for humans. It's in the neighborhood of trillions of miles, right? So we ain't getting there in our lifetimes. No matter what Elon Musk says about who, maybe I'll tweet him and ask him if he can send me there. But if you think then through that idea, then that means that if it's 40 light years away, that the light that we're seeing is 40 years old. So yeah, 235 trillion miles for in terms of distance, but light can travel that in 40 years. So we're not seeing super old. These planets existed there 40 years ago at least. And the sun that they're orbiting is what they call an ultra cool dwarf, which I think is an amazing Dungeons and Dragons character, first of all. But as a classification of a sun, it means that it's a little, basically overall, it's not quite as hot as our sun, which means that some of the planets can get closer to the sun and still theoretically be cool enough to have water on their surfaces. So yeah, they found 7 Earth-sized planets in this solar system. They're all bundled pretty close to each other, and 3 of them they think are in that habitable zone. And even if the other ones outside that habitable zone are not necessarily in areas where water would just hang out in liquid form on the surface, there's conditions under which, theoretically, there might be liquid water nonetheless. So that's pretty exciting news, I gotta say. I don't know. My thing, I always figure if we're going to find life somewhere else, I mean, I get why they're looking for water, why they look for methane, because if you're looking for life, it makes sense that it would be similar to ours, or if you're looking for life that we would understand.
Yeah. But that's life as we know it.
Exactly.
Right? Like, yeah.
So, if your definition of life comes down to the basics of has some method, it has an interest in self-preservation and attempts to reproduce. I believe those are the 2 main, this is what life in general is. If it comes down to that, there could theoretically be all sorts of things that do that. And not just chemicals hanging out growing crystals, obviously. But there could certainly be things based in, and whatever. We're getting into the realm of science fiction with that, obviously. But there's science fiction and science truth are 2 sides of the same coin, I will say. But nobody asked me. I am going to keep saying that.
Are you tired of the same old news? Just boring, you're not learning anything? So was I, and that's why we created this podcast. Well, what would really help us out is if you'd go to iTunes, find our podcast, give us a 5-star rating and a great review. And that will really bolster our listener base and enable us to keep giving you quality content week over week.
So for segment 3 today, we're going to do another installment of The Future File. And we're bringing you technology today that comes from the Disney Research Group. By the way, I love the idea that there are companies out there so cash rich and so gigantic that their R&D is just like, yeah, let's go make a thing and see if that can, shift the balance of power in corporate America.
So is this from their Imagineering group?
That's a good question. I don't think it's necessarily the Imagineers. I think the Imagineers, if I understand, which I don't, what am I talking about? But I think they are more involved in, park stuff, right? Let's go make the new cool fun thing. Right. Whereas this is just Disney Research.
So what's interesting, though, there's a local company in LA called U-Beam, and they've actually received a decent amount of funding, and they claim to also do wireless charging.
Well, see,
right? But they've come under a lot of scrutiny.
We haven't actually talked about it yet. I haven't actually said what the thing is.
I know too much.
Now you've given it away and shown people that we do plan in advance for what we're going to discuss on the show. Our demeanor as suave, improvisational, know-it-all scientists has been... So let me just go back a second and say, hey, did you know what the Disney researchers came up with? Wireless power transfer. Holy shit, ay caramba. Now, what were you going to say about U-beam?
I was going to say they want to do the same thing.
The same thing as, Disney. Listen, remember up top when I promised this was going to be one of our best podcasts ever? Fuck that. No, that's not what's happening today. It's just going to be me and Eric laughing for about an hour and a half. That's what we have in store for you. All right, let's restart this. The Disney researchers have come up with a way to make wireless power transfer. They've come up with a breakthrough on this. They very quickly, in true Disney style, root themselves in history and say, remember the amazing science genius Nikola Tesla? This is us walking in his footsteps. And, they weave this Disney-ish story around it. Tesla's intention was to make giant Tesla coils have this like standing magnetic wave around the world and then let electronic devices, have the wireless power transfer because he's just basically charged the world with a magnetic field. Doesn't work. Lots of people like to say like, oh, Tesla was a genius. He was working on this. And if only Edison hadn't, and maybe, what do I know? I don't compare to him, but, the Earth already has a magnetic field. So he had some bugs to work out as far as I'm concerned. But you can see cool demonstrations. Like if you take a big, Tesla coil and you put light bulbs next to it, you can get the light bulb to come on through induction via the magnetic field, et cetera, et cetera. And really that's basically what these guys are doing. But they're kind of reimagining a room with a big pole up the middle. I'm looking at an article on IFL Science that shows one of their demo rooms. It looks like a fireman's pole or a stripper pole right in the middle of the room.
Whatever floats your boat.
If I have to pick. So anyway, they run an insane amount of current through this thing. That was one of the things that kind of blew me away, because it says that they send 140 amps. I was reading the journal where they published this, and well, I won't pretend I'm as nerdy as that. I was skimming, and then that made me just like, wait a minute, 140 amps, that's nuts. Like, what does it take to kill you? And that's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 100 milliamps or something like that.
Oh, wow.
Like, it's off the charts. Like, if you accidentally had a short in the middle of your wireless power thing, you're in.
So what happened? Can I walk in there with a pacemaker?
I don't know about a pacemaker. So it's interesting because this particular article, which links back to the journal publication. So the journal publication is super science-y, and the IFL Science article is pop science-y. It's interesting the way they say, I'm going to reference it and get the exact wording because it's significant. A team at Disney Research, though, showed that they were able to transmit power in an entire room, powering a variety of devices while remaining relatively safe for humans.
Relatively, great.
That word makes a big difference in that sentence, right? Like, so now they go on in some of their explainer videos to say, no, it's cool, it's safe. And they show a guy in there and all that kind of stuff. And then, it's a big, giant magnetic field. This is always one of those kind of edges of...
I think there's some other interesting notes, like one that if there's just one pole, they're saying that it has to be like a 90-degree angle, but they solved that by having multiple poles in the room.
Yeah, that was like the early thing. It had to be perpendicular to the pole.
Right, and what's also interesting, they're like people shouldn't stand closer than 46 centimeters to the pole.
Right,
which basically exceeds how much energy humans can be subjected to.
But if you're 47 centimeters away, don't worry about it. All good. Yeah, I mean, it's a cool concept. It's definitely like I'm back to my my space flight. Don't give me version 2 of this. Like, and it makes a perfect amount of this is essentially the same technology as the like QR pad that charges your phone, right? Except that you come in and you set your phone on the pad. Is it QR? Q something. They've started putting them in Starbucks where you get the little loop and you plug that into your phone and then you just set your phone down on the little charger pad. This is essentially that, except that they're saying, well, you have to be near, you have to almost touch in order to get that to work. So what if we just crank her way up? And I mean, that's, that kind of amperage, is pretty nuts. So it says, perfectly safe for humans. But heaven forfend you ever like damage that pole, because then you're in trouble.
Yeah, don't dance on it.
Well, yeah. So the thing is, like, if they can get this to a place where they've done some robust testing and they've, made it sort of practical for everyday home use, that's pretty significant in terms of a vision of the future, right? Like, suddenly nothing needs a wire because we can Bluetooth data back and forth. It's always kind of power that's the limiter, but if they've got this in a place that that it's super safe, wow, they're going to have to work on that whole 46 centimeter thing.
Yeah.
Because, yeah. And I think the other side of it is, I mean, you think about electronics, the basics of Ohm's law, right? And even though it's going into an electromagnetic field, the number of devices in the room will impact what's happening with everything else that's going on in that circuit. You can kind of think of it as a circuit. It's even if it's going across the air. So they're going to need some kind of, I would think, a little bit of smarts behind that. I like it. Sign me up. Give me one for my house. But I will happily take version 6 of this. I don't want the next Samsung Note. I'll take a couple down the road from here. So, all right, that's been your Future File. Okay, you have an online business. You need to be able to accept credit cards. You don't have the technology. You don't have a whole tech team supporting you. What you need is 3D Cart. It's quick and easy to customize. You set it up on your website. They've got 24/7 tech support. There's no transaction fees. It's easy to use and customize, and you can get your first month free. Go to ads at the top of goodtalknetwork.com, find 3D Cart, and help support this podcast. Time for segment 4. Let's dig some more, where we go back to developments in some of the stories that we've talked about. And we started out each time. It's become, I'm just saying that's what it is, as if we've done it that way forever. I've been doing it for a few shows now. Darren's official omnibus offering of Mother Earth Dispatches, also known as Doomed, in which we recap climate change, because we have to have some place to stick all of the stories that come through where it's just like, hi, I'm Mother Earth, you're fucked. Because that's headline after headline. And that's where this is. So this allows us to just kind of keep you abreast of the fact that it's not getting better. Or at least the little it's getting better breakthroughs are so, they're very hopeful, but they're small and insignificant, and we're all going to die. So the first headline today is the potential Trump science advisor says climate change is great. So
how so?
This is in Wired. And they kind of, the person who wrote it is talking about the experience of having interviewed the predecessor and then talked a little bit to this person. He's a professor out of Princeton, and the author calls him not a climate change denier, but a climate change enthusiast.
Oh, God.
So,
that's a little contradictory.
Well, no, it's not. It's just saying, like, I mean, he's almost not necessarily, well, okay, they get into him pushing back on the numbers just like everybody does. But at the end of the day, he's saying, like, so what if we're getting more carbon dioxide in the air? That's good for plants. After all, crop production has gone up.
Well, if we weren't cutting down rainforests, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing about the science of ecology is you can't focus on one thing and assume that that's just a trend all over the place. Like, if you're in a sinking boat that's taking on water, you're like, it's not like, oh, good, I don't have to wash my socks anymore. Right? like, there's more going on around you than just this one thing.
There's more to drink.
Yeah.
I was thirsty anyways.
This is all fine. So, I mean, that's who they're talking about, which is pretty consistent with what we're seeing in all the positions, and with what Steve Bannon had said that he admitted, CPAC, that, yep, we are dismantling. See ya. Hope that's cool. So that was an inspiring story. Another cheerful headline was, fracking fluid is leaking more often than we thought. I like to send Eric into fits of desperate laughter with all of this because, what if you can't laugh? What can you do? I don't know. So there'd been previous research on fracking wells in order to find kind of like how many spills there have been and what kind of leaks. The EPA went across 8 states for a period of 7 years and checked to see how many leaks they experienced. And this study, published in Popular Science, and it was actually originally published in the journal Environmental Science and Technology, they went across 4 states, Colorado, New Mexico, North Dakota, and Pennsylvania. And they were attempting to essentially expand the science that they had previously and look longer at the lives of these wells in order to figure it out. Now, Eric, I want you to take a guess. They studied 31,000 wells from 2005 to 2014. Right. How many spills do you think there were? Out of
29,000.
Out of 39,000 wells. You're a little high. But honest to God, I would have picked something in the like tens or hundreds. Like spills, that should be a big deal. 6,648 spills.
No, wow. And that's just the ones they detected. So.
Sure. I mean, well, I would think in theory, because they're doing this, the whole point is to try to kind of determine when spills happen, and I would assume that they're not missing it, because when they're talking about spills, a lot of it is more close to the top, as opposed to what's going on down below. And it's like what spills out of the well at the top, and then gets into the water systems, and literally kills birds and causes people's groundwater to be flammable and whatever else. And it's interesting with fracking, like you see this kind of back and forth between like, oh no, we're all gonna die, versus like, oh, actually it turns out that we just weren't doing it well at first, but now we've got it licked. No, don't worry about it. So you've kind of seen some of those, and then this study is saying no, it's actually probably worse than we thought. So it's interesting because it's theoretically a cool technology, but it seems like the trade-off is pretty significant. The Popular Science, which again is pulling from the journal Source, says fracking fluid contains a slurry of chemicals, many of which are known to be dangerous, and even more of which are kept secret by the companies that produce them. Nice. So, I mean, that's not the kind of thing that I want going on in my home state. That's just me. And then the other headline that I pulled this week for Doomed, super cheery, says that high levels of chemicals found in indoor cats. So, yeah, They basically were doing some testing. They figured out that they had already seen that these levels were high, and they were trying to figure out exactly what was going on. Like, why did the cats have all these? Essentially, it's brominated flame retardants in them. It's because
it's from the couches.
You got it.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. So, it can cause feline hyperthyroidism. So it has endocrine problems. We use it in furniture. We use it in electronics. It's meant to keep things from lighting on fire, which is a noble ambition.
But it's been known for years that it causes issues.
Yeah, but evidently the deal is once it's out there, it's out there. It leaches into things. So if there's an old couch sitting in a dump somewhere, it doesn't really, so to speak, go away. It just turns into dust, and that dust is in our atmosphere and in our homes and everything. So if there's been some of that stuff in your home, and then it's worked its way into your dust, and you're continuing to breathe it, and hooray. And for cats at least,
might as well start a fire.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, as with all things science, right? It's trade-offs, and maybe it would turn out that there used to be more fires than there are now. Cat thyroid tumors. I don't know the statistics on that exactly. So it may be the kind of thing where we're finding that acceptable, but
or just don't let your cat on the couch.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to think a little bit beyond the cats, right? I don't know about you. My kids are younger than your kids. My kids will happily walk up to anything in the world and suck on it. So,
Sounds like a challenge.
So if you've got anything in your home that has these things in it, you're getting that kind of exposure. So that's the kind of thing that we got to worry about. So unfortunately, I didn't have any happy headlines for the doomed this week. But so it goes in the world of doomed.
A couple episodes ago, we had talked about an instance where in a court case, it was a murder case, that authorities basically wanted to leverage what the consumer or alleged murderer was saying to his Amazon Alexa device.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in that case, also, they leveraged an Internet of Things water meter to also understand, during the suspected murder hours, all of a sudden he's using a lot of water, likely and allegedly to wash blood away or evidence, right?
But he did have a hot tub. So yeah. Dude may have just been stuff went down and he decided to kind of go for a soak.
Yeah, why not just chill out in the hot tub time machine?
Right.
Make it all go away. I don't know, but rather suspect, right?
So there's been a development with the Alexa?
There has. So the warrant was issued, but Amazon is fighting it, interestingly.
Okay.
Their argument is that any recorded audio should have First Amendment protections, so that ultimately the warrant they want thrown out as a result, which is interesting.
What? I mean, so I'm kind of heartened to hear them resist. I kind of always, again, let's err on the side of privacy, and let's make law enforcement. I'd almost rather people get away with a thing or two. Innocent things, at least, if it means that civil liberties are protected. But I'm not sure that I follow the First Amendment argument. So it's like,
well, so they go on to
religion?
state they go on to state that the heart of their in their opinion, the heart of the First Amendment protection is consumers' right to browse and purchase expressive materials anonymously, and without fear of government discovery.
Interesting.
So if you think about the types of things people say into Alexa, right, it kind of falls into that realm.
Interesting. So, I mean, that isn't the same as, Alexa, how do I clean up a dead body? But it overlaps enough that they can make the case that, look, your shopping history is something you have the right to. And that kind of overlaps into the other Alexa things. Interesting.
Yeah, and they go on to say and give examples of what they determine or consider expressive materials. So things such as a podcast. He could have been listening to our podcast. Maybe not, because the actual offense was years ago. An audiobook or music requested by the user, things like that. Now, what's interesting, there are definitely people who view, not the same way. A professor from the University of Arizona, Tony Massaro, was quoted as saying that free speech arguments that favor machine speech are surprisingly plausible under current doctrine and theory. She actually co-authored a paper. So it's interesting.
Yeah, well, we'll have to follow up on that and see where that goes, because that definitely speaks to the future of law. Like, that could have a big effect on how we live if we get into a world where everything is listening to us and the Internet of Things is constantly sensing. And if that data becomes freely available, then what protections do we have after that? So
right.
We'll pay attention. Also in the Dig Some More category for this evening, we have the story that we led with last week, the resurrection of the mammals. We talked about how the lead scientist on that project was saying, hey, this is going to be so great. I'm going to reverse climate change by introducing mammoths to the permafrost, and my Mamaphants will knock down trees, and that's going to help everything. I forget what his exact argument was.
It was that. Like, it would stomp on the tundra and
yeah. Anyway, there's a article in Popular Science. They challenged a lot of that, and they came back with a few different ways of looking at it. What was kind of interesting, I thought, was that one of their arguments is, okay, if you start bringing back, if you start de-extincting organisms, then you're essentially creating endangered species. So
interesting.
You then have to, whatever your laws are regarding endangered species, you have to enforce that for whatever you brought back. And then,
or just bring back thousands of them.
Well, yeah, I mean,
once.
that's clearly part of the answer, right? You have to make sure that you get the population back up to a significant level. But remember, we were talking in that story about an artificial womb that had to be able to carry the Mamaphant for 2 years. There's a whole lot of science that had to be worked out. They're not making 1,000 of them next year, right? And what they did was they took some conservation efforts in New Zealand, and they looked at some specific endangered species. They came up with I guess New Zealand keeps really, really detailed calculations on conservation costs. So that was why there. They found a really rare species that exists now, the Chatham Island warbler. Chatham Island warbler, which is hard to say, harder to say than you think.
The warbler.
And exactly, the Chatham bellbird is extinct, and they kind of said, well, these are similar enough. We know that it takes us $100,000 a year in our conservation efforts to save the warbler. If you also bring back the bellbird, then we're going to have to spend our time and resources, right? And so the theory is you got to come up with that money somewhere, right? And that's not even counting the money that it takes to bring them back in the first place. The whole study assumes that universities and foundations will be interested enough, they'll just kind of make it all come back. So they'll deal with that. But once they're here, what do we do? So it kind of, speaks to my concerns that I had of like, well, don't start with mammoths, because at least
How about ants, some kind of ants.
Sure. Yeah, or you've got to change the laws on what you're going to conserve and not conserve, right? Just because there's 5 species of something, is it qualified? I mean, I would think in theory you could make a new category for de-extincted animals, right? I'm not even kidding, because maybe that is enough to be able to say, okay, we're doing a different kind of effort with those species.
Or it's okay to have one Mamaphants.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Now, this study has detractors. There's a guy named Ben Novak, and he is actually working on what I suggested, restoring the extinct passenger pigeon. And he argues, yeah, that's cool, but you're assuming that one size fits all, which doesn't make sense in the context of endangered species. It's going to cost, I mean, it's basically what you were about to say. If you bring back an ant, that's a significantly different cost than a Mamaphant. So his point is like, look, don't poo-poo the entire thing just because you ran some numbers on one particular bird. I believe they actually did more than just that, but so the conversation is going on about whether this is a good idea or a bad idea. And the interesting thing about the write-up in Popular Science is they kind of then get to the end and they go, oh yeah, also morals. So that's a caveat as well. That
Mamaphants have rights too.
Well, it's just the general should we or shouldn't we? I mean, I know. The study kind of was coming at it from a financial point of view, and that's cool and all, but there's more to it than that. So, finally, we're going to end on some, I'm going to call it good news. Facebook has announced an update to their trending topics section. And the idea behind it is it reduces potential bias. So we've spoken at length about the echo chamber effect and how it may have impacted the election in general. It's funny because socialmediatoday.com is running the story about this. They say, oh, with all the talk about fake news during the election, I gotta say, you and me were some of the first people talking about fake news, in all honesty. Not to blow our own podcast horns, but we got there early in terms of like, oh, by the way, fake news. And then Trump decided that he was going to co-opt that term and make it apply to anything that yeah, exactly, and make it apply to anything. But that fake news concept really applies to the Macedonian teenagers who were trying to crank out things that were so slanted that it would get them a lot of clicks and they could make a lot of money. Or, depending on your point of view, things that would help the Russians to steer the, et cetera, et cetera. But we've been through all that. The significant part here is that Facebook is coming at it. They've poor Facebook. I almost feel sorry for them a little bit, right? Because they tried to do that trending section, and all this happened, and the initial response was, no, it wasn't us. We're not a news source, And then slowly they were like, oh, okay, I guess maybe we're having some effect, and then they've slowly kind of gone, well, shit. I guess it's significant, which. All they have to do is look at the studies of the number of people, especially young people, who get their news even8primarily from that Facebook, even from that little trending thing. It's significant. So, and all of this fake news stuff happened after they were already under fire for the way their trending stuff. Well, we're going to use humans to kind of put together what shows up in trending, and then everybody kind of raised their pitchforks at that and said, well, that allows you to be biased about it. So then they replaced it with an algorithm, but then the algorithm was part of what created the echo chamber. So they finally reworked the algorithm. If you look at it, it's almost Google-esque now, because it is looking at which articles are in turn quoted by other articles and other news sources. So they have an entire algorithm in there. But the key thing is, if you are in a particular region, you're going to see the same thing as other people from your particular region. So you don't, in theory, now have the ability to dislike different sources and have it suddenly mean that you don't see, politics from the other side. So in theory, this is an interesting step in terms of like, okay, there should be a greater diversity of news, not necessarily in people's stream, but in that trending topics section, you're going to get at least a little bit of exposure to, let's say, a New York Times article that includes the word Trump lies in the headline, which you wouldn't necessarily have seen before.
Right.
And vice versa, of course. I rag on Trump a little bit because it deserves it, but it goes both ways. Obviously, there's people who are singing to their own choirs left and right, and I guess in this case, yeah, very much left and right politically, and hopefully we're going to see a little bit of an end to that. So that's my tiny bit of happy news at the end of the doomed segment, and all the other good stuff going on. Lots of science, lots of breakthroughs, and we're going to continue bringing all of that to you in a weekly basis that involves us laughing in near despair at everything that's happening. We'd love to hear what you have to say about it. Please hit us up. You can find us at goodtalknetwork.com. On Twitter, we're at goodtalknetwork. I am at Digital Darren.
And I'm at E-Fader.
And we would love to hear from you. You can also call us, 323-686-8255. Leave a voicemail. We'll come back and visit it and talk about your opinions in a later show in this Dig Some More segment. We would love to hear from you. Talk to us. We will talk to you, whether you talk to us or not. And we'll see you soon. Thanks for listening. Good talk.